In this video, I want to weave a doorway with some beautiful foliage around it and make it lean just a little bit Halloween. So let's get started. To start off this weaving, I used 412 linen warp string and I warped on just a single warp with 32 total warp strings. After that, I started this weaving how I start every weaving. I wove in a piece of cardstock, then I took a super bulky yarn and did a twining stitch followed by 2 rows of plain weave. Then I used this small book to create my fringe, and I used the same yarn I did for the base of the weaving, just a super bulky gray mix yarn. All the materials and tools will be linked in the description box below. I took 2 strands of that yarn and tied raya knots around 2 strings at a time to create my fringe. Then I wove in about 5 rows of plain weave before I start weaving in the door. To create the door, I used this mixed brown super bulky yarn. I wove it in over 2 under 2. So then that allowed me to get those rows really close together to create a really dense look door. And it'll give some difference to the texture I'm gonna do for the background, which is just plain weave. After that, I went back to the dark gray yarn and wove in the background just using plain weave. Sometimes when I'm weaving 2 different shapes next to each other that are straight on the sides, I like to tie the warp strings together later, but this time I'm gonna do interlocking because I do want to create a bit of an outline on the door later. So all I'm gonna do to do the interlocking is I'm gonna grab one of the warp strings that is part of the doorway. I'm grabbing the very far one. And then when I go to the next row, I just push another one of those brown rows down and grab the next warp string. Now what this does, as you can see, is there's no longer a gap between these 2 sections. They are now connected. Once I got the sides filled in, I started going directly over the door and finishing up the background, ending it with a twining stitch. Before I start adding things like needle felting and foliage and all of that, I'm gonna flip this over and tuck in all these ends so they're just totally out of the way. To create some emphasis around the door and make it really feel like a door frame, I took some light beige merino wool roving, you can find this in our shop, and I just needle felted a strip of it all around the door. I always use a foam pad behind my piece to do this, and as I'm needle felting, every once in a while I peel up my piece because it does want to sort of stick to the felting pad, and you can see back here it's fuzzy from us pushing those fibers through the piece. Then I started to make some little stairs and I took a few scrap pieces of wood. This is kind of a rectangle dowel that you can get at the hardware store. And I stacked them up and added another little piece of scrap in the back so I could create a mini staircase entry into the door. And because I was feeling a little extra, I decided to stain them as well so that it wouldn't just be the natural wood color. It would be more deep and provide some more character for our door. It was time to start figuring out how to add some plant life to this piece. Ultimately, I decided to use these little twigs and create mini leaves to go on them so that they would look like a fall tree. I created the leaves just like I did in the pumpkin woven wall hanging video, and I basically just tied a thread around 3mm strings, so these ones are a little bit thinner. I cut off at the section, brushed it out, and then I just used my scissors to shape them into a leaf. I ended up making so many of these, which took a long time, but I definitely think it was worth it so that I could make each of the tree branches really nice and full. After I was done these beautiful fall tree branches, I made a broom. I wanted this to lean a little bit Halloween, and I thought it would be a nice nod to just have a little broom outside the doors. I took a twig and 2 pieces of 7mm cotton string, and then another piece of yarn to tie it around the string. I did this really tightly, knotted it, and then wrapped it around and knotted it again, and then I just trimmed it off so that it was all even. My door felt like it could use more detail, so I took some really dark brown merino wool roving and I needle felted in some vertical lines so that this door would look more like a plank wood door. I'm done all the elements for this piece, but before I put them on, I'm actually gonna finish the whole weaving and then add them. So I'm not trying to rest this weaving on top of them when I finish the bottom. When I started to add everything to this piece, I started with the stairs because it's the bottom and the trees and the broom were gonna rest on top of that. And then I figured out the placement for the branches. I used some blue tape to mark where I wanted the first branch since I didn't really have any reference points of where to put it. And this helped me place it in the spot that I liked. Then I added the second branch and finally the broom. I did cut the broom shorter and I trimmed off the end as well because it was feeling kind of large for the size of the door. All right, you guys, it's all done and I'm so happy with how this turned out. So let's have a look at the final piece. This one was so much fun, and if you enjoyed this video, check out this one next.